carry on. Diane was not feeling well this morning, so she's moving slow.
All right, cool. We have 2 Catherine Boltons, so
I know. I was going to
we're
try to edit that,
supercharged.
but I'm not sure quite how to do that. Oh, wait, here we go.
No worries. So Leanne actually has a hard stop at, is it like 8:55, Leanne?
It actually starts at 9:15, so I've got till probably 9.
So 9 o'clock, great.
Yeah.
So we'll just crack on. I guess let me start by formally calling the Finance Committee, School Board Finance Committee meeting to order for March 15th at 8 a.m. Thank you guys for doing an early meeting this morning. And it looks like we're on track to have the first reading on our calendar for this Thursday's school board meeting, which is great. So a couple of things that we wanted to iron out. And Kate, if you don't mind, maybe just throwing up the agenda.
Do you want me to put the one up with the notes that I made?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
Okay.
So just wanted to get an update on the turf field number. If we have it, just a quick, another quick discussion on the long range planning number, as well as the location of where that sits, whether CIP or operating. I know we talked about that, but I just want to finalize it. And then have a discussion on those additional roles as well. And I think we should be able to accomplish all that in an hour. Cool. Do you want to start with the turf field? I think, or Kate or Sandy, I think you guys said you might have had an update from Todd.
Yeah, so I linked in some information here. There was a little bit of a flurry from our school and town leadership trying to get some information together for us. So I appreciate that. I was screaming and stamping my feet a little bit last week because I was concerned that we didn't have a good number in our CIP budget. And we always do like to try to have the right number going forward. We know that can sometimes confuse people. So I think if it's okay, I'm going to just pop open this thing with the notes in it so I can speak.
Yeah, sure.
Intelligently, sort of. Come on, babe, get out there. There she goes. I just want to grab the numbers off of this. So Todd Souza met with Todd Jepson and Dan Hager just to go over the sort of where are we and what's next. We also talked with Mike and I talked with Todd, so we all kind of circled around. At the bottom of this document that's linked into the notes, there's the document we shared the last time we talked about it in depth, and that gives a little bit of a history of the project. But our big concern was what cost do we need to put into the CIP budget to move this project forward? And obviously it's still an estimate, but at least getting a little bit better estimate than the kind of off the cuff $1.5 million that we got in our first meeting with the town officials. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I learned was that the bid process that the town undertook in 2019 did not include engineering, design, and project management. It was strictly a bid process to find the vendor for the turf and track materials, the company that would actually install the new turf and track. Okay. So one of the first things we heard was, oh, you probably really ought to get some engineering and project management in here. And we don't even have a design yet. And even though it's, here's the turf field, please put a new turf field in, you still need engineering, you still need specs, you still need project plans and drawings. So in talking with Todd Souza, he had mentioned to me that the town has a number of engineers on contract, on retainer, engineering firms, and that's so that Public Works can do their projects without having to go out and go through a bid process every time they need to replace a culvert or pave a piece of road. So that's kind of cool. And one of the firms that they have under contract is Woodward and Curran. And Todd Souza, I have to keep saying which Todd, Todd Souza heard from the company that did the testing on the turf field, the Sports Labs folks. Mm-hmm. We saw their testing analysis recently in January. That firm told Todd Souza that Woodward and Curran is a great firm to work on projects like these, that they've worked with them before in this area and that they have a lot of experience. That's not necessarily to say that we would go with them, because there are 4 or 5 other engineering firms that the town contracts with. But I guess I should stop and say at the moment that the town through Todd Souza is still very much engaged in helping us with this, with the thought process. Todd has said, look, I'm not just, going to walk away and throw my hands up and say, I have no interest in this. I'm going to do whatever I can to support it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a nice conversation.
Hey, just a quick question, if I can jump in on the project management.
Yep.
If I remember correctly, that one of the reasons why they didn't originally include that was because the town felt like they had the resources to kind of do that project management themselves. But was it the recommendation that sort of, if we take over paying for this and management of it, that we should include that as part of the scope, because we don't have those resources? Is that correct? I'd
say it's a little bit of that, because of course the town has a whole public works department and planning department and so forth. But I think that actually, it's my understanding from my conversations with Todd, they intended to use an engineering firm, but because they already have this relationship with them on contract, they intended to do it as sort of an operations thing and not as a piece of the project.
Gotcha.
I may have interpreted that incorrectly, but that was the feeling that I got from Todd Souza was, yeah, they would still need plans and drawings and designs and engineering, but that they intended to do that more as an operating cost.
Okay.
And I think if we're going to take on the project, we need to take on the whole project. And you're absolutely right. We don't have the capacity to manage a project. I mean, Todd Jepson is certainly qualified to do so, and Mike Legage as a team, those guys will be critical. But I think in terms of time and bandwidth, there's really not time for them to do that. And they would still need to contract with someone to do the engineering and drawings. So the $80,000 price tag is an estimate based on some numbers that Todd Souza had gotten from a firm. He had a local firm, and then he had another firm in Massachusetts when he was first researching this. So again, that led me to believe that they did intend to include that as part of the project, but they didn't include it as part of the bid process. Todd Souza said that even though they had a successful bid process and they awarded the bid to the firm whose name I've forgotten, and it's in here, Turf Field.
Field Turf?
Field Turf. Look, I wrote it Field Turf and Turf Field. Take your pick. I believe it's Field Turf, though. Those folks are still pursuing the sale. There was an email to April recently. But Todd Souza feels that at this point, having abandoned the project, lost the project, starting over, redoing it, that we might be interested in going out to bid again, because it's 2 years later and there are other firms that would be interested in bidding. And I don't think we have any legal obligation to Field Turf. Of course, we would include them in that process. So the beauty part of getting an engineering firm is that they would actually do the solicitation and award of the construction bids. We would give them that role. And we've done similar things with Goral Palmer for the site work for the portables at Pleasant Hill and 8 Corners. It's a pretty typical relationship, and they would also do the project management for us. So we'd have to select the engineering firm, but we wouldn't have to do a bid process because the town, again, has contracts with these folks.
Okay.
We could pick the best fit for our needs and then have them carry it forward. So then we get to the meat of the project. We take 1.6 million, which was the original quote from Turf Field. I mean, I'm never going to get them right. And add 8%, which is the amount that we've been hearing from architects and engineers on other projects for the increase in construction costs since we've last taken a look at a couple of our projects. Then we add a standard 10% project contingency, which is what you need when you dig a hole and you find that there's something mysterious under there you didn't know about, and then you have to reverse engineer around that. And you come up with $1.9 million. And I think that's a good number to put in to our budget at first reading. And that's how we got to it. And then, of course, as we go forward, we can actually engage in receiving some real quotes from people and maybe make that number a little bit more precise. But I think the first piece that we would be targeting would be choosing the engineering firm and getting a price tag from them. So it's really not the bulk of the project that we'd be able to nail down, because we really can't go out to bid for the project, I don't think, until we have some kind of budget authority.
Hey, quick question. On the engineering firm, if that was from the 2, possibly 3 years ago, when we did the first round of estimates, is there any concern that the $80,000 is too low right now?
I think it would depend on the scope of work for something like that, because your construction costs are going to involve materials, and the material prices have gone through the roof, where the services prices haven't so much. You know, these folks may be in some demand, so there may be a time crunch, but more so than a price crunch.
Okay.
But Todd's guess was that we would probably be fairly safe with 75 to 80,000. I put it at the higher price tag. And the fact that we already have a relationship with these engineering firms means that, you know, they're kind of standing by to do this work, which I think will give us a little bit of an advantage on price as well.
Okay, thank you.
So I think, I mean, we've already made the decision really as a committee that we think this belongs in CIP. And I think, Kate, that was your and Sandy's recommendation as well.
Yeah, I don't think there was much of a discussion about this being in CIP. Oh, you don't mean in CIP or operating. You mean that it should be in ours and not the town's?
Both. I think, you know, Leanne and Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, but we kind of made the decision as a committee that it's going to be our recommendation to keep this in our CIP and rather than put it into the operating. Right. Yeah. I'm seeing head nods. Leanne?
I think it was still an open question,
Okay.
at least for me,
Cool.
But seeing these numbers and knowing town council's appetite about going out with larger numbers on a similar project, I think the only right thing to do at this point is to put this in ours in order to ensure that we can get all of the work done.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. First of all, I would absolutely advise you to put this in CIP. It's the perfect candidate for a capital project. It's a one-time, at least for the next 10 years, it's a one-time project. It's a $2 million price tag. And if you put that into your operating budget, you're really going to make a crazy bump in that one-time bump in that operating budget level. And I'll come back and make the same statement when we talk about the long-range planning.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a bit of a increase, right? But it's a responsible increase because it's not just a sort of a finger in the air, right? You guys have done the work and figured out what we need to get it done. And ultimately, I think, you know, we shouldn't be putting something forward that's like a half of a project. And so I guess it kind of is what it is at this point, right?
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think it's we may want to refine that number, and we may want to do some what they call value engineering to change the scope of the project to make it come in at a lower level. But remember, we haven't even bid the project yet. So I think we want to start with a number that encompasses everything that we think we're going to need. And then hopefully before we get to referendum, we have a more refined number so that the public can say, oh yeah, it's really not this, it's that. But we need the budgetary authority, in my opinion, at least at first reading. And I think it also speaks to two things in the relationship with the town as far as budget approval is concerned. One is that they have the town council finance committee has talked a lot about projects that were deferred last year or the year before, bringing them back to the table and evaluating them and trying to move them forward so that we don't lose any important projects because of the pandemic economy and the struggle that we had with last year's budget. And then the second thing is that, you know, we've had a lot of conversations with town leaders about the fact that this isn't something new to the school that we just dreamed up. This is a project that we've all agreed needs to move forward and that the town has asked us to take on.
Right.
You know, if we are taking this on, but repairs still need to be done, will the town still be putting those in their budget for this current year? Or do they have them already in their budget from FY21?
My understanding for this year is that the work that will be done to mitigate whatever they need to do for this spring will be done by the town. Yes.
Okay.
And, you know, I hesitate to say on screen on recording that, you know, that it's Todd Souza's intention to keep taking care of this. But we did also talk briefly about not moving the care of the fields and the rental of the facilities and all of the big picture things we've talked about, not moving that to the school side in the FY22 budget.
That includes any revenues that come in?
I would guess so. We didn't talk about that in detail. But as long as the town is managing the rental, then I would imagine that they would also be managing the receiving the revenues. That's assuming that we have a field that anyone wants to rent.
Right.
And, you know, and Mike and I have talked about the timeline for these things quite a bit. And if we are able to move this project forward and we have the support of the town and the referendum, it's not going to be repaired until the spring of 2022. It's not, you know, the project won't actually be able to be underway, assuming we have a successful referendum in November, which means that by that time we'll be building the budget for 2023 and we can be having all kinds of cool conversations about who owns it and who fixes it and who rents it, all that.
So unless there's any objection, I think really the action there, Kate, is for you just to update the number in the budget to the 1.9.
Okay, and that was kind of what I had figured, at least to kick us off. And I'll need to also share that with Colette, who's putting the budget book together. And the CIP, I think you'll probably remember, appears on both the town and the school parts of the book.
Yeah.
So I have a note here. I have a few sticky notes for some reason.
And I was planning to update, I had sent sort of a summary of where we were to the town council finance committee, and I was going to update them just in advance of our first reading anyway. So I'll make sure to call that out.
That's cool. Yeah. And I think we had made one or two adjustments in the executive summary based on the feedback that I got from you guys before we even did the workshops. I remember changing that CRF funds chart, or actually it was the local budget for COVID chart to show some status of the spending.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if they have that most current version.
I don't think they do, but I'll pass that on.
Okay. And the budget book is linked in everywhere nowadays. So I'll get that updated.
Leanne, Kristen, you guys okay to move on, or do you have any other?
Let's keep rolling.
Cool. Okay. So the long range planning number, I think the reason why I wanted this on the agenda is because Kristen had sent an email to Andrew just to see if they could kind of connect and potentially reconvene. But realizing that we probably aren't going to get an updated number until we can actually bring the building steering committee back together, which is not going to happen right between now and first reading. My proposal is that we keep it as is in CIP, but that we call it out as an item in motion. And the reason I think we can do that is because if we're able to bring the building steering committee back together and they say, you know, if they kind of confirm what they've already said, which is it's their recommendation that we use $100,000 that we have already in this year's budget to start the project. So maybe do a site selection, do some work. Then we might be able to get an updated number on what we would need to do sort of following that. And is $286,000 enough to progress it beyond site selection? And if not, then we should update that number to be what it needs to be in between first and second reading. So I think that's kind of my proposal. Leanne and Kristen, without having shared that with you prior, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I like the idea of it being a moving number. I think it makes sense. So yeah, I'm in agreement.
Yeah, I am. So you're saying to do what again, Sarah?
That we just leave it at the 286,000, because the reason we came up with that number, I guess, just to summarize, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, is because the total project we were saying was going to be 386,000. But appreciating that we don't know whether or not we're actually going to get the 286,000 approved, we've started some discussions on what can we do now to progress the project with the 100,000 that we have. And so knowing that we could potentially use that money this year, is 286,000 enough for next year to continue the project? So just keeping that 286 as a somewhat fluid number or an item in motion between first and second reading, in the hopes that maybe we'll get more clarity. And if we don't, and we also don't progress or do anything with the $100,000 this year, and we just add it to the 286 for next year, then I think we're covered. We know we're covered to at least do some work.
Yep, sounds good.
Cool. Sandy, are you guys okay with that approach?
Fine with it.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a perfect way to start. I was just making a note for myself. I couldn't remember what the percentage was, percent change, but it's 10% added on, and that was at Andrew's suggestion over the 350 that we started with, or did we start with 375? I have to find my notes on that.
I think we started with 350 and added 3%.
I think it was only 3%. Yeah.
Okay. I'll take a look at that. Not that you guys, we don't need to call that out. I think that's a great approach, Sarah. And we do have sort of an items in motion. There's a section in the regular budget and the operating budget that talks about big stuff like salaries and CBAs and anthem rates. But I think maybe in the CIP, since I'm going to be changing that narrative a little bit for the turf field project, I could also change it and say just the description of that project to say, this is pending additional conversation with the building steering committee.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I heard from town council when we had that little meeting was they just want to understand the scope. So, and I think really that's the goal of getting the building steering committee back together, is to be able to define how we would be define more clearly how we'd be spending money.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you see I put some notes in there. I actually haven't had a chance to find Tom Hall and talk to him about CIP versus operating, but at least for first reading, I would strongly advise that we keep that in the CIP budget. I believe that's where it really belongs. And if the real downside to that is a level of scrutiny from town council that's different from the way they approach our operating budget, I'm not sure that's a bad thing, because I think we're going to need their support going forward. And it's exactly what you said, Sarah. They need to understand what it is we're doing with those funds, what the scope of work is, because if it's in our operating budget and we're sort of, la, here's our project, and then they haven't had those in-depth conversations with us, and we're ready to ask them to create a referendum for a building, it's just going to take more time to catch up.
Right. Okay. Cool. Leanne, Kristen, good?
Yep.
Awesome. Moving along. I like it. Enrollment, additional roles. So Kate, I'm wondering if maybe you could give like a quick, 2-minute summary just to make sure we're all aligned and very clear on what the ask is and sort of what are the data points that are being considered for the additional staffing.
Okay, so in our deliberations as a leadership team, both the full leadership council and the central office leadership team, I've said this a couple times, but one of our biggest struggles has been knowing what to expect in terms of enrollment in the coming year, and looking at the numbers that were projected for us pre-COVID, understanding where we are now in relationship to those original projections, and what the next year is likely to look like. And so, of course, the size of our enrollment impacts the size of our request for staffing. There's kind of two pieces to this, and I actually, because I felt like it helped me, I made a little chart here at the risk of, this is really like a sad way to do this, at the risk of having someone say the word investment. I went back to our investments chart from last year, and I took the, here's where we're starting, here's level services, here's reductions based on personnel turnover. I'll actually call this up on the screen if you want to see it, but I'm afraid to show it. But I used that document for myself to look at the impact of what was actually asked for in our budget proposal as it stands now, and then the additional 5 positions. The additional 5 positions are 2 at Wentworth School and 3 at the middle school. And they are based on our noticing in the enrollment and staff size data projections that we were doing, that the middle school had the highest class sizes of all the phases right now. And one of the reasons that they're managing is that half of their kids are not in school right now. And so a worry is that when all students are back in school, that might lessen their ability to be responsive and reactive to kids' needs as we transition back to in-person learning. And we know that those needs are probably going to be pretty high at the middle school, just like they are in other phases. So there are 3 positions on the table that aren't included in the original budget proposal at middle school. There are 2 at Wentworth School, and Wentworth School currently has 3 additional classroom teachers, which are being paid for with federal grant funds.
3 or 2?
They have 3. They have asked to retain 2 of those positions, but we don't know that we're going to have federal grant funds. Of course, who knows? As soon as we establish our budget, we'll probably get a nice message on that. Maybe that'll be positive and nice too, but we want to be able to include 2 additional classroom teacher positions at Wentworth School. So it's a total of 5 positions. They're currently unfilled in terms of cost. So we're using an average professional cost estimate. $84,000 a position, $420,000 total. And so the quandary for us was, if we stick with the budget that we have and we don't add 5 positions, would we be able to reallocate those positions from other phases? And so the thought would be, if we want our budget to stay at the lower level that we've proposed, we would take 2 teachers from the K2 level teacher positions and put them at the Wentworth level. And we could potentially take 3 teacher positions from the high school level and move them to the middle school level.
What would that do to class sizes at K2 in high school?
So if we did that at K2 right now, provided that the students who arrive on our doorstep are the students we're expecting to see, it should leave class sizes quite low at K2 still. And Monique is on the call, bless her heart, because she is our current class size and enrollment data guru. So we can dive into the charts again if you'd like to. But at K2, in order to maintain the class sizes that they've had this year, they believe that they could reallocate 2 positions.
Okay.
And the same is true of the high school. And looking at their class sizes, we feel that there's room for them to reallocate. And it would be a general smoothing of class size K-12, and it would be a reallocation of resources so that the staff follow the students. Now, all of that said, our school leaders and the principals would advocate to keep those positions that they do have, because again, we're going into an unknown sort of situation this year with kids coming back into school. We're not really sure what learning recovery is going to look like. We're not really sure what social emotional learning and those kind of needs we're going to be facing. And so having additional staff, professional staff, would never be a bad thing in this kind of a situation. So that's why the quandary, right? We could, if it were a normal year, we would say, oh yeah, sure, just take one from here and move it there, because your class sizes, your enrollment is changing, your kids are moving up and down in the grades. This year, we're sort of thinking a little bit differently in terms of staff supports for kids.
Okay. I have a couple questions, but I see Kristen just came off mute. So KT and Leanne, what are you thinking?
I think for me, it seems, I don't know, the more staff, the better with the year that we're going to be walking into. I think if we need them, we ask for them. I think that's where my head's at now. Class sizes can't possibly be too small with the year that we have coming up in the fall, in my opinion. That's it. That's my initial thought on it. I would like to see those positions added in.
I would agree with what KT is saying. Thinking of from a high school level, would moving teachers around disrupt curriculum? Would it disrupt the classes that are in place already? Also, there was something that came out over the weekend about the 3 feet may not be eliminated come fall. So I want to make sure that we have enough people on staff so that we can get our students back in the buildings. I would hate to see us in a position where, because we didn't ask for enough teachers, that we were struggling to try to meet requirements from the CDC.
I think that point is well taken in terms of disruption. I mean, every year is a new year. Every year is new kids and new grades and new courses. But I think you would definitely hear from our building leaders that the fewer changes we make in things we don't have to change, the better. Sarah, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I agree. I think, if we need it, we should ask for it. And that's kind of what the whole theme of this budget was about, right? And I think the one question I have, and I'm going to channel my inner April Scyther here, is, if we add 5 teachers, 2 at Wentworth and 3 at middle school, do we actually have classroom space for them, especially at the middle school? Yeah.
Yeah, I can answer that, because that indeed was a question we discussed as we were talking about enrollment.
Yeah.
And I very much appreciate the notion of, if we need it, ask for it. We were sensitive to the economic situation as a leadership council. And that's why reallocating staff and allocating staff where students are was also something that we talked about. In terms of space at the middle school, Kathy Terrell and I have had several conversations about this, and it would indeed, we would have sufficient space in the 6th grade wing, and in there is another classroom space available, and in the other wings there is. That said, it may mean putting some other content areas on carts or looking for some other spaces.
Okay.
Irregardless, we're still going to have the students and we're going to have to find a space for them.
Gotcha.
Monique, I wondered if at Wentworth, to me, it seems very straightforward. They're classroom teachers, they're the homeroom teachers, and I think most people know what that means. But at middle school, I think the ask for 3 teachers goes to the content areas and the teaming that they do at middle school, which I think is a little different.
Yes. When we worked on the enrollment numbers, the teaming that happens at the middle school is that those teams of teachers deliver the 4 content areas of ELA, math, science, and social studies. And so there's only one, I believe, one classroom that's under 20. And the range, the target range in a normal year, obviously we are in the 2nd year of what is very unnormal, is 20 to 24. And when we took a look at that, we excluded the specials in some of the smaller class sizes. But those middle school teachers, kudos to them, as all teachers are working very hard to meet students' needs. But at 20 to 24, it's quite a challenge. When we took a deeper look at the high school enrollment, that was not the case. And there are some areas where the enrollment is quite low by department, and overall lower than even at our K2 and 3-5 schools. And so part of that is not because anyone hasn't done anything or that the high school has asked for such class sizes. Their enrollment has been dropping over time. And so it's one of those situations where a couple of students each year, even 30 students each year in a size of that high school, is such that it gets absorbed. But there are some places where we could ask if people want to move around, and then look at retirements. And that's typically how we've tried to balance those resources, is when there might be a retirement, and when we don't have a need, we either reallocate that position or we eliminate that position. And that's how in the past we've been able to sort of balance and make sure that the resources, the staffing, goes to where the students are in terms of enrollment.
Okay. And so these would be all 5 new hires, right? So presumably if they're in the budget and the budget passes, you guys would start hiring from them right away, or would you wait and see what the enrollment numbers are looking like before doing so?
Well, our thinking was this: we would probably hire right away. As you know, the job market right now is quite tight. We've been struggling to find staffing as it is. And so we also want to make sure that we hang on to everyone we have. And so as we would get going as soon as possible to get ahead of the job market and what that looks like. Where we want to keep the flexibility is within the any federal dollars that move forward. So when we figured this enrollment, we went with what is, which is not always what we do in the budgeting process, but being sensitive to the economic times, we did not move forward with any of the models because the models don't seem to fit. They never accounted for a pandemic. So we're going off of a range of what we have as of in terms of enrollment for December, to the upper end being those students we know are Scarborough students, but they've chosen for their education elsewhere. So it's a pretty tight range. So we want to make sure we hang on to any federal dollars in case we need to use those and allocate them for staff at certain phase levels, should an enrollment or a bump take place. the big question mark annually is kindergarten.
Yeah, and you, just to be more specific, that would be over and above the 5 that
Correct.
we're asking for. Yeah.
Correct, because even with the 5 allocated where they are, I would advocate that if you still look across enrollments, K2 and 3-5 may still be higher than where we want them as compared to where high school would be, for example. So we would still, we want to keep a close eye, particularly on K5. We're also talking about how we might organize our instruction differently as well. Those conversations are always happening.
Okay. So there are 2 parts to this conversation. I think, right? There's, should it go in our budget, and then how should we fund it? Should it be funded in our operating budget, or should we look to use the ESSER funds?
Our recommendation is not to use the ESSER funds for these positions, because that will eliminate any flexibility we have.
Yep.
In terms of what the fall might look like. That would put us in a pretty tight spot, and we would then need to go back to ask for more money for more positions. That's the challenge. It would be the reallocation of staff would be that step in between, in my thinking.
Okay. So just on that first bit, though, it sounds like there's agreement, Leanne and Kristen, from us, that we should advocate for the roles. And I mean, the thing that I heard the most in the budget workshops, right, was class sizes are so important from across the board. Everybody said that. So I am in favor of, if we're anticipating that we're going to need these additional classrooms, we've figured out a way that, we know we have space for them. While I appreciate the fact that we're being conscious of, the goals that were set forth by town council, it seems like the responsible thing to do to ask for them. Leanne and Kristen, can you guys just chime in on whether or not you're comfortable with that?
Yeah, I
I'm
agree.
absolutely comfortable.
Okay. Cool. So I think my opinion on the ESSER funds is slightly different to yours, Monique, and I don't know how we solve this. I mean, ultimately, right, you guys are sort of own the budget right now for first reading. And so put forward what you think is best, and we're going to help advocate for that with town council. I feel like we might hit some pressure with the $438,000 that we know that we have, right? That's something that we know we have today, and kind of holding that for what we don't know. And I totally understand the logic behind it. I was incredibly supportive of that last year. I'll be supportive of that this year as well. I hope this isn't seen as a cop-out by anyone, but what I'm thinking I want to advocate for, similar to the turf field, the long-range planning, is, we know that there was a bill that was just passed by our government. And while we don't know what we're going to end up getting or what the restrictions are going to be around how we spend that money, I think it's a pretty safe bet that we will get some funding. And hopefully we'll find out what we'll get at some point between now and second reading, and maybe not. But I would like to leave that somewhat up in the open, up in the air, because I'm not sure that, I think we might meet some resistance in asking for additional operating budget for these roles when we have the funds for ESSER available to fund them. Sorry, I know it's not probably a popular opinion, but that's kind of where I stand right now.
I think you're right, Sarah, that we're going to be asked that question. Why wouldn't you spend the money that you have? If there were no new stimulus package coming and that was that, I think we would probably not have that question asked quite so vigorously. But having had large buckets of federal money poured on us over the past year has already raised some wonders in the town council, and the community at large. So why would they not also wonder about us increasing their tax rate while sitting on federal dollars? I mean, that's perfectly correct in a political sense. I think it would be really cool to know what that amount would likely be in the new stimulus package. I noticed the administration's been moving very quickly to try to get that in motion. But then I also agree with Monique 100% that if that's what we know we have, and we don't know what we're going to face in terms of K registration and move-ins are the two biggies, because I think a lot of people have put housing plans on hold in COVID, but we know that a ton of people have been buying homes in this area from away. So that's a little bit of a wonder. Are we going to get a lot of move-ins? And there's a lot of housing stock here right now, which is why we got the big projections for enrollment that we did 2 years ago. One of the things that's cool about the ESSER 2 funds is that they're available to us actually 2 years out from now. So we wouldn't lose the capacity to use them if we didn't use them within this current year. But Sarah, I completely get it that, you know, people aren't going to want you to pocket $400,000 and ask for more.
Yeah, I think we just might be setting ourselves up, right, for, I mean, at the end of the day, right, we put this out there and town council may come back and say, you got to drop it by 1% or 2%. And then I guess it comes back to this group to say, well, where's that going to come from? Yeah. And if we still want to advocate for those roles, then maybe we have no choice but to use the ESSER money. So I think a little bit of it is out of our hands, but Leanne and Kristen, what do you think?
Kate, do you know when we're expected to get the new guidelines and the new amounts?
I don't know. The last business managers meeting we had was last Thursday, and they said, you know, don't know when we'll know. But as I said earlier, I think that the Biden administration is trying really hard to get a lot of info out. They've been the big salesman for this project, and they want people to know what's in it. So far, all I know is what's in the papers, and that's true at Department of Ed as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if we learned a little more quickly with this administration than we did with the last.
And as we move forward with seeing if staff want to shift phase levels and or if there are retirements and there are some savings that we can garner, my thinking we can do that, and then it will take a little bit of the pressure off either the ask or those federal funds, which could alleviate some of the enrollment stressors at K-8. That would be part of our regular process anyway that we've done over time, and we would continue to do that in order to be able to have as much flexibility as we can diving into the unknown school year is my thinking. So I appreciate the need. I appreciate your advocacy for those positions, but I totally understand where if it's available, why not use it? We're just going to have to be careful that we don't set ourselves up for a cliff a couple years out as well.
Yeah, and that's a much bigger question than a 1 hour meeting can encompass. But I think, you know, what does it look like for us for class size in the future? How long does it take kids to bounce back from some kind of an experience like this? And, you know, what other supports are we going to need in place and for how long? Those are things we don't really know the answer to until we try them. And this next year is going to be just as much of an anomaly, I think, as the year prior. We've been making it up as we go along, and we're going to keep doing it.
Liam, what do you think?
I have so many thoughts right now. First, I agree with you, Sarah. I think that we need to use that federal money in the budget. We're going to get scrutinized very hard if we do not. I think the 5 positions are a necessity. We've got some funding to help cover them, so we need to. And I'd also ask that we be really cautious about shifting too many things around with the high school. If 6-8 is heavy right now, those kids are only going to continue to age up. So we're going to need to have the staff there. I also don't want to shortchange what they've gone through. There's a lot of care that they're going to need as well coming in. I don't think any one phase level is more or less impacted by what's happened in the past year. And I want to be really thoughtful that we're treating everybody with the same amount of concern, and that there's smaller class sizes, that we're helping people regain any traction that may have been lost along the way, and reintegrating them into a very different type of learning style, hopefully in the fall.
The only other question, or I guess thought I had, is, part of the ask, right, is that we're making assumptions, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I think we're making best case assumptions based on the data we have, right? At some point that's going to become more, we're going to become more confident in that data in terms of enrollment. Will that confidence level increase at any point between first and second reading, or is that all happening sort of after second reading?
It will most likely increase, because typically the K2 principals have a pretty good handle after kindergarten information night. Typically there's maybe a variance of about 10%, but they shared with the leadership council that they would feel much more confident after that evening in knowing particularly the K numbers. In terms of the decisions whether or not families want to have their students return to school, remain remote, continue with homeschooling, or attend a private school, sometimes we don't know that until later in June or so.
Right.
But that variance, if you look at those enrollment numbers, that's I think 45 was the largest total, and I believe that was the high school.
Okay.
So yes and no is the answer.
Yes and no. That's the answer to everything these days, right? I think that the K enrollment, I agree that between now and the final vote on the budget, we'll probably have a much better number. The reason that the ESSER funds flexibility felt good to me is because of move-ins, because I don't know that we're going to see folks. If I were the parent of a young kid right now and I was thinking about changing my community, I would probably be waiting until later in the school year to see how things were going.
Right.
And quite frankly, I might move in January and come back, start my kid in their new school in the second semester. And that might not be the greatest thing for kids, but we see it happen on a small scale in normal times. And my worry is that it will happen on a different scale in these times. So, and I may be wrong. We'll see. Maybe people will really want to stick with the whole full school year, but that's in the back of my mind.
Okay.
But it would be really awesome if we did know what we could expect from the new stimulus package, because that can definitely inform our thoughts. And it can also, I heard, I don't know if this is true, but I heard that there were some more reasonable timelines on the spending in this case. And so, maybe that helps us bridge the gap between this coming school year and the year after, when things maybe would be in a little bit better recovery, but we might still need additional resources.
Yep. Okay, so we have 3 minutes left. So I guess Kristen and Leanne, do you guys have any other questions or comments related to this?
Other than thank you very much for accommodating my wonky schedule with a very early in the morning meeting.
So I guess maybe what I'll suggest for this piece is, you know, from my perspective, even with this number in the operating budget, we've still met the goals that were provided to us. And that I think that the finance committee, the school board finance committee asked to sort of the guardrails that the finance committee provided as well. So I mean, I kind of put it back to you guys to put in there what you think needs to be in there. And then after first reading, we'll have a better indication of where the town came in, what those numbers equal up to, and what we both need to do to get to the second reading goal of the 3% mill rate. And so I, you know, this is like we've always said, right? This is the first step, and we kind of work through it between first and second reading. And there's as we've just discussed, there's a lot of variables at play that we'll get more clarity on between first and second reading that will help to inform our decision. It's clear to me that this isn't a superfluous ask, right? It's a need. And then how we pay for it is kind of a question maybe that we address down the line. But that's kind of where I'm at.
That sounds really smart to me. I think we start with what we need, like you said, we fund it with how we think we should fund it, and then we can flex between this and second reading. So Sarah, I'm gonna prepare a motion for you, or motions.
Okay.
Like I usually do. And so it sounds like I'll be using the version that has the 5 positions in it just to kick things off, because that truly is the leadership team's recommendation.
Yep.
So I'll use those numbers. They're represented here, but what I haven't done is in the executive summary or the budget summary charts, these are all based on the lower ask. So I'll go through and update those as well, and make sure that everybody has all of these bits broken out with the extra number in there.
Okay. Sounds good. And I know we're at 9, so Leanne, if you have to hop, I just have a question maybe for Kate and Sandy in terms of how this is going to be presented at first reading and to town council. If you have a couple more minutes to talk through that.
Yep. I got time.
Do you mind just like sharing what your thoughts are and how this is going to be presented, like at first reading? Like, are you planning to what level of detail are you planning to go into?
I think I'm trying to think what we did last year. Back along, seems like we did a summary of some slides and kind of walk through those, knowing that so much information could be shared and people kind of get drowned with too much data. So I think it's trying to find that fine line where people feel like they're informed and they have the information, and certainly they have backup information to look at down the road, but at the same time be mindful how much screen time they can digest as well. Kate, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was looking at our slide deck from last year, and things were a little different because we flipped the order of things. We had the school board's first reading, I think the day after the presentation of the town school budget, and then we had the whole sort of COVID disruption to our calendar. But Sandy's presentation last year, he did a little bit of a state of the state. Here's what's going on in schools, and here's why we need resources to give a foundation to the budget ask, which I thought was very cool, but it probably doesn't fit into the agenda for this week because we're going to be doing nothing but talk about what's going on in schools and with the calendar and the excuse me, and the reopening information that you guys are going to be going through. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I figured we probably just try to keep it fairly streamlined and have it be, here's what we're asking for, here's what's included, and then have just a ton of supplemental material for people who want to go a little deeper. The one thing that I wasn't sure about until we had this conversation was what is the proposal? Is it plus positions or is it not? And so knowing that that's the case, that we're going to go out with those 5 positions in there, I would probably frame that up on a slide as well and say, this is what it includes. This is what the budget includes.
Okay.
And it includes positions that we restored, which we already talked about in our baseline budget in the workshop. It includes 2 added pieces, which are the ed techs for the high school for special education and half a social worker at the high school.
Okay.
And then it includes these 5 positions and maybe have a slide about what those are.
Cool. That sounds good. I mean, I agree with the short or the streamlined version of it. I think, and Leanne and Kristen, I'll take your guidance as well, but the way the information was provided in the budget workshops resonated, right? So that was like really, I came away with that being very clear on what was needed and, why it was needed. And then the numbers will come after, right? But like, that's the takeaway. And I guess the reason why I'm asking is because I think because of the agenda for Thursday, we're anticipating a big turnout. And so I see this as a huge opportunity if we can very clearly articulate, what we're asking for and what we would want folks in the community to pay attention to and advocate for. I don't think we don't usually get that big of a turnout for a budget meeting. And I think we'll have it this week. So I want to take advantage of that.
I'll second that, Sarah. I think that one of the pieces that was so important was to hear what are we going to get and what are we going to lose if we don't get it. And I think that is the biggest part of the message all the way through. And you're right, we're going to have a lot of people who are paying attention, and having that conversation of what does it bring, I think is even important for the town council. They need to hear all of the parts that we heard, because it was rich information. It was powerful to know what the dollars are going to bring, because it's not a small ask.
So it's perfect timing, Thursday night,
Yeah.
right?
It is a little bit of a magical ask though, guys, because remember we spent 4 hours with that group, and we heard, purposefully setting aside that amount of time so that we could go into depth about what's going on with each of the departments, with each of the schools. And so I totally get that we're going to have a great opportunity to get some of that information out there, but I'm not sure you all want to sit for quite that long in a school board meeting. So we might have to pick and choose a little bit. So I don't know if you have thoughts about what data points really did resonate with you and what you want to make sure that we call out. You being the audience for those workshops, and you taking away what you took away would be super helpful to me to know. Boy, that was a tortured sentence. To know what would be useful for the public to hear.
Yeah. Totally. I think we can take a stab at putting together a couple notes between the 3 of us.
I mean, if it's just like bullet points on an email, like don't forget to mention the whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I'm more than happy. You know me. I'm more than happy to make too many slides. So
yeah, and I'm not trying to create more work for you guys. I just I just thought this would, I want to really take advantage of the attendance that we're anticipating.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking, they're not going to want to hear about this and they're not going to hear about that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be like super, like cut it back because of time. But you're right. I mean, if you have the audience there and these are your supporters and these are the people who want you to educate their kids, then knowing the hows and whys of it, that's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Kate, I'm happy to help you out with some of that if you want, but I think it's a great idea to get from the finance committee here, what were those threads? What were those big ideas that you want to make sure are touched upon?
Right, because as you know, and I did go back to it, we have all the workshop slides with lots of details on them. And of course, the leaders spoke more eloquently than the slides do, but we can certainly pull any kind of data points from those slides to incorporate into the big meeting presentation.
All right, cool. Leanne, Kristen, any final thoughts? And we'll wrap it up and let you go, Leanne.
All good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
This is like Sarah said, I think we have some good, it all makes sense.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much. Monique, thanks for joining. And we'll close this and we'll talk to you guys many other times throughout this week. It's going to be one of those weeks.
Lots of opportunity. Yay.
Thank you for your
Bye,
advocacy.
everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.